right, we are a few minutes after the hour. I know we're a little lighter than sometimes this meeting is, and folks may still be hopping on. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and this is our Federal Focus on Housing meeting. Um, Even though I'm not the main presenter today, I will say, just as I was kind of coming into this meeting and trying to think like how to open the meeting, it feels hard to think about how to open these meetings. And I'll just, to share that the world has completely changed for Minnesotans and for Minnesota since the last time we hosted one of these meetings. Um, So I just want to say I really appreciate all of you so very much. Thank you for being engaged in this call and thank you for everything that you're doing. Um, as Minnesotans who work on housing issues and within community, um, I know that we're really trying hard to figure out how we support each other as well as communities that we are based in. Um, this immigration surge has Minnesotans shell-shocked. I think also for us who work in housing, knowing that this has been a very blatantly race-based campaign, really hits hard as housing is inextricably linked with issues of race and racism. Before we turn to Commissioner Ho, who's going to be our first speaker today, again, since we have not yet met, I just wanted to hold just a minute for offering our condolences to Minnesotans who are not with us today, who've lost their lives, as part of what's happened with this surge of federal officials or officers. And so that is holding space for Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were killed by ICE officers, and for Victor Manuel Diaz, a Minnesotan who lost his life while in ICE custody. So if we could just have a little bit of time together. So I'm going to turn things now over just to give you a little picture of what we're going to have as our program today. We have a special opportunity to hear from Commissioner Ho, who's going to talk a little bit about Minnesota housing and kind of what are the things that they are reacting to, paying attention to, want to let us know about Minnesota housing in light of what is happening federally. And then, and we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A with the commissioner. So we'll kind of look to you to hopefully use the chat to kind of help us understand what might be questions on your mind, and we'll get to what we are able to get to. And then we're going to have David Gonzalez Rice, who is a Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, will give us the latest state of play in Congress and what is happening with the HUD budget and other issues of that nature. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Commissioner Ho and say just thank you so much for joining us. And I know there's others from your staff who are on the call as well, and I don't know if you want to acknowledge them, but I know they'll also help with any chat questions.
Well, thanks for figuring out how to get us started today, Elizabeth. I know. This is really hard, and I know that it's impacting everybody. Some folks more directly than others, but it really is in some way or another impacting us all. And so I want to thank you all for continuing to do your work, because the work that you do helps people be as safe as they can be in their homes. And thanks for the work that you're doing outside of your work life to represent the very best of who we are and standing up to this. I think it's the stories that I hear from my team and our partners about the things that they're choosing to take on, and the methodical, courageous, thoughtful way in which folks are organizing, rising up. It's like that, like digging for hope. I'm digging for hope some days, and I get hope in those stories. And so I just want to thank you for what you're doing in your workday, and I'm thanking you for anything else that you're doing, or while you're supporting staff or your neighbors in what you're doing. And thanks for being here this morning. All right, pivot. HUD puts about $1 billion a year into Minnesota. And it flows through many different vehicles, a portion of which, but not all of it, and not even most of it, that flows through us. And the biggest thing that we do is the Section 8 project-based contract administration. And as we deal with the will they or won't they, do they have a deal, do they not have a deal, federal stuff. Thanks, Elizabeth, for giving the explanation of Congress to somebody else, because Congress kind of defies my understanding right now. But what we do know is in the past federal shutdown that the project-based rental assistance continued to flow. There were a couple irregularities that happened at the beginning of the year last year, but in general, that money has continued to flow. And so we'll hope there's not a shutdown, but if there's a shutdown, we'll know on Monday morning whether the money for February rent was dropped into our account. And then, for context, as we head into a legislative session, we get about $183 million a biennium. So 91.5 million a year from the legislature. And so as we think about like worst case scenario, what would happen if the HUD funds stopped flowing? The state money is super important and allows us to do things that other states don't do, but it really is small in comparison to what the federal funds do for the state. And I know that folks think that maybe Minnesota Housing is positioned to kind of be able to read tea leaves or a magic ball, but we're pretty much getting the exact same information you do from the same sources you do. And having worked at HUD, in headquarters for 4 years. I have never seen such bizarro land as when you go out to their website to try to get information. So we're trying to unpack it at the same pace as y'all are. And oftentimes, what you hear in the morning is different than when you hear the next day. So just know that we're alongside you. We don't have any special intel into what's going on out there, other than the fact that there are still a few dedicated career staff who have managed to hang in there and are trying to help us decode what's going on. I want you to know that me and my team are really engaged in actively listening to what's going on, and are very aware of the fact that the housing needs of Minnesotans all across the state are really significant right now. The economic strain of folks just taking steps to protect themselves and their families, understand that has put real economic strain on families, and it's the 30th of January and rent's due again. I'm also hearing from so many of you, like what you're doing to just meet the moment, the way that you're participating in mutual aid, the way that people are trying to figure out how outside traditional government programs that people might be shying away from, the way that you're helping people either move about in the world with a little bit of extra protection, or if they're staying at home, how to get folks cash assistance or food assistance or diapers, whatever it is that a family needs. So it's really kind of extraordinary, just the grassroots action of making that happen. I'm also hearing loud and clear that we have a need for more emergency rental assistance. It was good to see our DFL chairs call for legislative action in a priority way to make money available. And I'm also hearing and in dialogue with many of you around what the benefit of an evictions moratorium could be. I'm also hearing from those of you, Patty, I saw you pop on and off, they're involved with the HUD continuum of care stuff, about what the worst case scenario is if HUD were to follow through on dismantling everything that we know about what works with homeless assistance and supportive housing. And, therefore tracking what Congress will do to stop HUD from doing the worst things. I have a big title, but I'm in the 8th year of this job, and I've really come to appreciate the limits of my power. I cannot make money up here without legislative action. I don't have a bunch of emergency powers that are just available to me, and I don't have a partner in the federal government the way we did when we were confronting the pandemic, that allowed us to understand that help was on the way. That said, my team is working really hard trying to figure out what we can do within the powers that we have. Renal Ray's team is actively taking some of the money that we had appropriated for the long-term fixes to strengthening supportive housing and trying to partner with DHS to solve the service funding thing. And we will be releasing some of that money in the coming months to help solve some of the short-term problems that might be arise out of HUD's um, change in continuum of care thinking and some of the issues related to billing over at the Department of Human Services. We are pleased to see that the Bring It Home rental assistance money is starting to hit the streets. But of course, even right away, we know the need is so much greater than the available resources. I think it was the St. Cloud PHA that opened and closed their waiting list, and the demand for the resources so outpaced what they have available. We're talking to our congressional delegation and staffers about what would be helpful and what they must do. We're in daily conversation with the governor's office and Minnesota Management and Budget as we think about what priorities we can hold up as we head into the legislative session that starts in a couple weeks. We're in regular conversation with the Attorney General's office and have supported them in their litigation, in particular around trying to stop HUD on the continuum of care work. We are trying to coordinate with national advocacy efforts and local partners around having our voice in some of the egregious federal rulemaking that's going on right now. We're dealing with federal audits to federal programs where we are hoping that they're conducted as business as usual, but we know that Minnesota is being uniquely targeted right now. And, we're still trying to get out there and just celebrate the housing accomplishments that oftentimes are the result of years and years and years of work of what our partners have been trying to do in terms of the creation of more housing opportunities for communities. I think the one thing that I wanted to just hit most specifically was around the call for an evictions moratorium. I mean, we've gone back over kind of the sequence of events that led up to that in March of 2020. That started with the declaration of a peacetime state of emergency, and then a huge infusion of federal funds, both through the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, that allowed us to kind of imperfectly try to help people stay at home and help property owners get made whole. I think the most important thing is that we focus on getting the money because being able to pay for folks to stay at home, I think, is going to be an important part of their being able to stay safely at home without creating a lot of political divide over things. So just know that I hear you, and we are engaging in conversations with the governor's office and the legislature about it. But I'm just really focused on, is there a way for us to bring money to the opportunity to help people stay safely at home? So that's kind of what I got. I want to thank Elizabeth and Minnesota Housing Partnership, other organizations like the Housing Justice Center, and so many others that are really helping us all rally and coordinate and share information during these really, really, really hard times. And again, just thank everybody for what you're doing in your day jobs and with the rest of your life to try to take a stand during this moment. So I'm happy to open it up, Elizabeth. I don't know if folks have questions. I haven't monitored the chat here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Commissioner. Excuse me. I'm just now, it looks like a couple people just put something in the chat, although I'm just trying to read it. And let's see.
I
Uh,
love I love Tammy's comment. I think it might be metaphorical that the elevator is out of order and we're going to use the stairs one step at a time. Thank
right.
you for that, Tammy. I actually got a smile out of me on that one. Yeah, on Claudia's question about
Yep.
if when funding is available, how will it be managed? That has everything to do with like how the legislature would decide to make the funding available. And so it's one of these things where the details matter. What I've asked my team to do is to think about if the legislature were to make an emergency appropriation, what can we advise them on in terms of trying to make it available as quickly as possible and through channels that we think would be effective at getting it to households who are really needing it right now. And so standing up something brand new is slow. And so I think there are benefits to using existing pipelines. And I think it's really important also for us to all um, understand that there's never enough family homeless prevention assistance money in the system. There's never enough. And so we should always be arguing for more funding for that program. And uh, that we need to think about how we do that in the political context in which we operate today. But we always need more FHPAP. It is always a rationed program. And so I think there are ways for us to think about how we talk about it so that we're elevating the fact that there's always a need. We may have a unique need that we're dealing with right now. Uh, but I think to just appreciate the fact that we can always use more of that. And then we just need to be smart if we get an emergency appropriation about how we get it out so that we meet the need that meets the moment.
So we have time for maybe a couple more. I saw Rebecca Bowers had a suggestion or a comment, and if you want to go ahead and say that, I think, um, Rebecca.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Ho. We have a very small amount of FHPAP, like everybody. We can only serve like 10 a month in our entire county. But where we have been having some good success is working directly with property management of properties we know have high numbers of impacted families. So we've done a couple on-site, real quickly pulled together events where property management has called us and said, hey, we know we have at least a dozen families late that are impacted. We show up and there's 50 to 60 families there. So we're just getting buried with need. But that's been a good approach because we can direct people if families have children that are citizens, we can direct them to MN benefits and make sure they understand that they could apply for that if they're comfortable. We're triaging and pulling in who we can help with. Some were referring to FHPAP, like we had some youth families to YMCA, and then we're pulling other ones into our program. But we've really found we have to be there with property management for that trust factor. And also we've needed help with translators. So we've been starting to get communication from property managers sent to us saying, what can you do to help? And it's been really effective to have them, okay, here's the link we're sending out to them, send it to your tenants. And they've been willing to do that. So I think that has some promise. And with Minnesota Housing having such a huge reach into property management, maybe we can look at some of that or some of our other partners. Homeline, Housing Link, all of you all have so many contacts, but there's just a big misunderstanding about who qualifies for what, and people are terrified to contact the county. So just putting that out there. We're going to continue to do that. We had a faith community meeting last night that had a bunch of pastors that willing to help. So I think there's lots of things that we can do, but it's just the need is gigantic. So thank you.
Yeah, Rebecca, the good work that you guys are doing on the targeted outreach actually crossed my desk yesterday, so thank you for that. And the housing stability team is trying to figure out what are the appropriate ways to be communicating with our network, so that we are kind of responding to just some of the realities of the moment, uh, but really trying to figure out how to maximize the flexibilities that exist within the program. There's a lot in the chat, Elizabeth. I know you've got David here, and I
We
want to let you
do. I
in
was just
time
in
as you feel fit,
my
but
apologies. I
if
was
it's
just
anything else.
trying to navigate. Was there a last question for you here? And um,
So my team and I are reading the chat. I just want to acknowledge the news that Ms. Jackson dropped in there. My team is reading the chat. Appreciate the input. Appreciate being able to be here, and you know, bring me in as helpful. I wish I had more answers.
okay. Well, maybe I will just say thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you for opening the door to conversation. Lots of questions about both FHPAP, but also kind of working together with providers. So it feels like that's some ongoing close conversation that needs to continue. I also want to acknowledge what Ms. Jackson put in the chat, which is some folks may not know that is our St. Paul, City of St. Paul Council member Bowie. Apparently, her husband was just arrested by ICE officers. So, anyway, um,
Yeah,
my thoughts
yeah.
um, are inadequate. Um, so, with that, I know we do want to hear what is happening in Congress. And let me remove this pin here. And our second guest is here. David Gonzalez Rice. And so maybe I'll invite David if he's not unmuted. There he is. Okay. So, David, I am going to turn it over to you and get you pinned right here.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. I want to say hi to some old friends and really happy to be joining all of you today. Anne, I got to meet in person when she was out for our NLIHC board meeting. Jennifer, it's always good, very happy to follow you on any agenda. Michael was on our housed campaign call last week, telling our audience there about what's happening for you all in Minneapolis. Um, uh, Honored to join you for this conversation, even in this heavy moment with the news that Ms. Jackson shared. I'll tell you that I have my son upstairs doing remote learning, and if I have to stop and catch a beat, he stomps a lot and kicks his soccer ball around during remote learning. So he's at a school for the deaf here in Washington, D.C. So there's no speaking; everything is silent, but he needs those movement breaks. So if anything, kind of distracts my attention. That's what's going on. Um, I'll share of course, there's a lot happening here in Washington, D.C., as well as around the country. I'll start with the recent call to action that NLIHC put out, asking Congress to separate out the DHS funding package, particularly the Senate to separate out the DHS funding package, consider the bills, the appropriations bills, including THUD, separately and move those forward. And we maintain that position now. Of course, the state of play is very fluid. As you may have seen in headlines this morning, Senate Democratic leadership came to an agreement with the Republicans and with the White House to put in place a stopgap measure funding DHS for another 2 weeks while they continue to talk about guardrails and protections. I will say what I told our staff on a staff meeting yesterday, that as the National Low Income Housing Coalition and as a 501(c)(3 that does need certain basic background conditions of constitutional rights to apply in order for us to continue advocating for just housing policy, the position we've taken to date is that the violence and the undermining of civil rights has to stop, and Congress has to make it stop. We have not adopted a proposal or signed on to a proposal about what affirmatively needs to be put in place going forward, which particular guardrails, what structure law enforcement and immigration enforcement would take. We have colleagues in the civil rights and immigration rights spaces who are looking to for that. But we thought it was really important to join our advocacy to the chorus that was saying, enough of this. This has to stop. Bring it to a stop. And in light of the news that was just shared in our chat here, um, we continue to see concerning exercises of law enforcement's prerogative to arrest, detain people. So until we see really meaningful steps to rein in that kind of um, action, our posture will be the same. Um, to back up a little bit and talk about what was actually in the T-HUD bill, my team member, Kim Johnson, of course, put our analysis out through memo to members and an e-blast. So I would be happy to take some questions about that. I want to draw attention to a couple of pieces of the T-HUD bill that we're still trying to wrap our heads around. We had advocated for, and we're happy to see language allowing the use of tenant protection vouchers to keep families who have emergency housing vouchers housed. The additional appropriation on the tenant protections voucher line is appreciated, and it's never clear how exactly costs going forward in the voucher program are going to look. It's devilishly difficult to predict how much money you actually need appropriated to meet costs. I don't think any of us are confident that what was added to the protection voucher line is clearly sufficient to meet all of the EHV need, particularly when uh, you know, housing agencies around the country that are engaged in other kinds of uses of tenant protection vouchers will also be looking to that pot. So there's even some discussion from our partners in the PHA industry groups about how HUD will interpret the language allowing that use of tenant protection vouchers, whether it's sort of just enough funding for this year, or only the authorization to use that money that way this year, and then having to pick up this question again about what to do for EHV families down the line. So we, acknowledged the action by Congress to do something for EHV families. Grateful that there was additional funds allocated to tenant protection vouchers. Lots of work
Excuse me.
behind the
Could you
scenes.
point me to sunflower seeds? Thank
So
I don't think that was a
I
question for
will
me,
look out
Heidi.
for that a little bit better.
No, you're okay. You're quite all right. And then, of course, we were happy to see the language around the COC funding. There's a lot of complexity there in terms of kind of setting a timeline by which Congress expects HUD to renew programs if it still hasn't sort of clarified what it's doing for its awards process. I wanted to draw attention to the 60% floor for permanent housing that Congress put in place for the FY27 competition. So, sort of setting the expectation that permanent housing will still remain a really critical piece of the COC program. Congress uh, didn't go as far as to set that floor closer to kind of actual recent practice in the COC program at 80% or better. Um, so uh, I think for all of us, how Congress needs to act with respect to the executive branch and the administrative state is still unexplored territory in our post-Chevron world, right? Now that the Supreme Court has um, made clear that Congress cannot defer as much to the administrative state and the uh, agencies to, through rulemaking, kind of spell out the rest of the law. We'll have to learn in our advocacy what we want Congress to spell out to really direct the agencies. May need to give them less leeway, which is a tough thing to do, but may be necessary in that environment. So just a couple of things I wanted to flag out of that budget negotiation that we're still trying to reckon with what they'll mean for our advocacy in the coming year. Finally, I'll mention on the regulatory front, we're working with National Fair Housing Alliance on a commenting strategy. We mentioned this on the Housed campaign call. They have a comment template they'll be circulating. We're also drafting our own comment that will focus in on some of the impacts of walking back from disparate impact in the context of fair housing. We're contemplating a comment that focuses on the potential for uh, investigation and action by HUD of disparate impacts in zoning. In a lot of the conversations that are happening in Washington and with members of Congress, there's a widespread acknowledgement that zoning is a real sticking point in getting more affordable housing built. And then folks tend to say, not much we can do about that at the federal level. We want to remind people that, in fact, one of the tools the federal government has to do something about zoning is the disparate impact test within under fair housing and the ability to follow up where zoning has deleterious effects on protected classes and take action. That's never been as robust as it could have been, but it remains a tool that's at the federal government's disposal, particularly if we do not lose sort of the disparate impact test as a way to do that. Finally, we're watching for uh, much anticipated rule. Yes, Linda, zoning is the new redlining and the old redlining, right? Is the legacy of redlining in so many instances. And I think we can't be sort of too precious about that in the conversations about supply that are happening in the think tank space and the policymaking space. Um, uh, the rule on time limits and work requirements has moved out of Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. We expect to see the text of that rule imminently. So we're working with National Housing Law Project in particular on a comment strategy there. Uh, as has been reported for a while, we expect that rule to give housing agencies, PHAs, the option and not the requirement to implement uh, time limits and work requirements. Our congressional strategy will likely involve driving home to the members of Congress that their effort to give housing agencies that option is the Moving to Work program, which is bound by rules that Congress established and which could yet be evaluated better. We've maintained the position at NLIHC for a long time that MTW has not been adequately assessed. It gets deployed in many ways across the country. We want to remind Congress that they have an effort to give housing agencies those kinds of flexibilities, and it's the moving to work demonstration. Um, and they should be alert to efforts from HUD through regulatory action to create something parallel on the side. I've also been talking with some folks who represent MTW public housing agencies who are attentive to the risk that HUD's rule, if adopted, could give state legislatures room to require PHAs within their jurisdiction to enact those time limits and work requirements as they're allowed to under the HUD rule. Some MTW agencies would not want to do that, right? They would prefer to use their flexibility as they have under the MTW program. And Michael, I'm going to come back to that question in a minute. I know I'd said finally, but there's one more thing I want to talk about. There's so much conversation right now about HUD's recent communication to PHAs on verifying the eligibility and the immigration status of folks in their programs. HUD ran a data match between the data it gets from PHAs and data in the SAVE program, which is a database HUD is not responsible for, but which DHS has long advertised to states and local governments and providers as a resource for verifying folks' eligibility according to their immigration status. SAVE is not a perfect database. And so, in my comments to stakeholders, to press, I've really emphasized that the SAVE system running the save system against the data HUD has is basically a data quality exercise between those two databases. It doesn't really tell us much instructive about the work PHAs already did to verify the eligibility of folks in their programs. There was never any kind of expectation set with PHAs that they would be held to the SAVE database as a standard, although they've had it as an option, as a tool for part of their process for verifying eligibility. Um, so there's a lot of interest in this topic. Folks are trying to understand what does this 200,000 number mean that HUD is citing and sort of flags from this data match. What does it mean that HUD is saying there are X number of ineligible immigrants and X number of deceased people? I keep coming back to the fact that PHAs have done their homework on the eligibility piece before they enroll people in their programs. HUD has now gone and done a data match with a different database and is asking them to repeat that work uh, to, you know, essentially um, prove that their work and not this other database is authoritative. Um, so I've mentioned a lot of different things. As I said, there's quite a lot happening, and I'm happy to take a breather, open the floor for questions, and I'll take a peek through the chat.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, David. I know we might get a few in the chat, and I know I've got a couple as well. Just like as you're taking a look there at the chat, I'll just note for folks that we did have several members of Senator Tina Smith's staff on the call. Ben Elgin and Jack Smythe were on. I think they had to hop off, but I believe Amanda Enzovino from Tina Smith's office is still on. I just didn't know if you wanted to say anything, Amanda, not to put you on the spot, but just give you that opportunity as we're turning to Q&A. All right. So, and if they hop back on, happy to let them give us some feedback on what's happening from their point of view. Anything you wanted to pull out in the chat, David?
Michael asked, what is the one thing we can all do?
The one thing.
The one thing. Um, I'll maybe give you one thing in two flavors. We have an interesting position on the debate about funding in front of Congress right now because, as well as HUD, and its budget, our organization also cares quite a lot about the FEMA budget, which is within DHS. My team member Noah Patton, who leads the DHRC, Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, he worked with that coalition to send a letter yesterday to Democratic leaders and senators uh, describing that um, they should not take FEMA funding as a pressure point that overrides the need to get a handle on Border Patrol and ICE, right? In essence, right? We care a lot about the FEMA budget, and FEMA's going to be okay. FEMA can weather a short shutdown here for a bit. Um, so where you have equities in disaster recovery, you have colleagues who work in the sort of disaster housing recovery space. That is an angle that could be useful just to clarify for folks in the Senate who might be concerned about um, a lapse in FEMA funding being too damaging or risky to stomach. Um, it's our assessment, anyhow, that they can set that concern aside for a bit and really focus on dealing with the deadly force and the civil rights violations that are being visited on our communities. Um, Similarly, I would say I'm not certain how clearly this has come across in our calls to action all along. As NLIHC, we have historically and often in a shutdown had a top line message, stop the shutdown, right? The assistance that people depend on is too critical. Um, but risk assessments change. And I think in the last shutdown standoff, and certainly in this one, after looking at uh, the kind of accounts for rental assistance, checking with our PHA group partners, other folks who are advocating on the federal level, um, the top line now is stop this violence, get these agencies within DHS under control. Um, and we're trying not to reinforce the idea that avoiding a shutdown is the main thing, right? Um, you can do these two things at once, Congress. You can fund the critical programs. You can take the time, a little bit of time that you need to wrangle with this DHS problem. And if it takes a short shutdown to get us there, at least for now, um, we can tolerate that. So to me, that's the message to get across to the Senate. Kind of a different risk assessment than our coalition has offered in the past.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I'm looking to see if folks have raised hands, and in the absence of that, I'm going to bring up a couple things.
Sure.
One thing and if I missed that you dove into this more than I realized, I apologize. But as we look at, and I think both Sue Watliff Phillips and I had the same idea at the same time, we posted NLIHC's analysis and budget chart in the chat for you to take a look at and see a little bit more detail on what we anticipate will be the fiscal year 26 HUD budget. Um, Public housing is an item that did have probably of the whole package, kind of one of the most notable and concerning cuts, which was about 500 million, as I remember that correctly, to the fiscal year 26 budget. I'm not sure I understand how that, kind of plays out state by state or PHA by PHA, but I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that and how we understand the impacts and how we think about maybe is there a next, maybe the next question after this is I'm curious your thoughts as we build into a next year strategies on what are the high risks and areas that we need to focus on for next year.
Thank you for raising that because it's an important and difficult issue. That is the biggest disappointment in the T-HUD bill, I think. And the conversation around emergency housing vouchers and tenant protection vouchers that we've been having this week backs quickly into the conversation about PHAs and their risk for shortfall in the coming year. So we've advocated for full renewal of all vouchers, plus, the vouchers on the TPV line. And one of the difficulties is full renewal is sort of calculated against HUD's formula for projected inflationary costs in rent in particular. And so Congress met that mark, and yet what we're hearing from our PHA industry partners is that even at that mark, plus this concerning reduction in funds allocated to PHA operating and so on. PHAs are looking at a really significant projected shortfall in the coming year. So we'll have to kind of, I think, work together across those of us who are advocating for tenants' needs and advocating for PHA's ability to keep the lights on, keep their staff paid, keep their buildings maintained, um, figure out how to message both. Uh, it's really great that we fully renewed all the vouchers, and there will be this serious hit to PHA's operating funds. Um, that's going to be just a really difficult area we're going to have to work on. Yeah.
I just wanted to note that Ben Elgin from Senator Smith's office did rejoin the call. And just as we have a few last minutes, I wanted to give him an opportunity to say any message from Senator Smith before we return to you, David, for maybe some closing thoughts.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you. And hi, everyone. I see a lot of familiar names. But yeah, again, I'm Ben Elgin with Senator Smith's office, and I have my colleagues Jack Smythe and Amanda Anzavino also on the call. And so I didn't hear all of David's comments, but I trust they were all accurate update and appreciate the work of the coalition. But from Senator Smith's perspective, I'm watching the floor right now. We expect some more votes today. But there's a lot of uncertainty about timing and kind of what the package may look like. I will say that Senator Smith opposed the procedural vote yesterday um, because of the ICE funding, and she is opposed to the package while ICE is in our communities, and until there are those steps that need to be taken so that we have accountability, and so Minnesotans are safe. And so, that is her focus kind of in this conversation. But we are aware that, this HUD funding, these housing resources, are tied to this package. So we're tracking that. We're tracking the COC language in the T-HUD bill. So that's not lost on us. And so again, we're continuing to track. The senator is tracking. So appreciate the work that you all are doing. And so, would love to keep in touch as, it evolves, as we maybe get a better sense of votes that are happening, later today. So I'm very fluid, but again, appreciate being here. And don't hesitate to keep in touch with our office, Elizabeth. I know we work a lot with you. So yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Ben. Really appreciate it. I don't know, Sue, if what you had was short. We are at our last minutes.
Sure. I can
And
say
then
it real
I'll turn
quick.
to David. Yeah.
Sure. So when we passed the McKinney-Vento Act in 1987, it was basically to fund the entire continuum to housing. The Hearth Act, as it amended McKinney-Vento in 2009, put a floor at 30% of permanent supportive housing. Obviously, there's never been anything in legislation prior to that. Obviously, through the last couple decades, through the NOFA or NOFO, it's prioritized permanent supportive housing. What the Hearth Act also did was allow the permanent supportive housing renewals to move to Section 8. So I'm wondering if National Low Income Housing Coalition is going to pursue that opportunity to help stabilize those programs.
It's an interesting point, Sue. I think we're always struggling in the housing space with sort of ceiling on total allocations that can really force trade-offs among these programs. So I think we're continuing to advocate for increases in the Section 8 program that would make uh, more feasible that mechanism. Um, I know I was involved in the state of Connecticut when I worked there in efforts to stand up what we called the Moving On program, right? Kind of identifying folks who didn't need the support services in the same way, who could be eligible, and that our state housing agency identified resources that went along with that. There's just always such outstanding demand, right, for those vouchers, that it's hard to direct them to one population versus another. But we'll keep those conversations going. It's another good reason to talk about expanding the voucher program. You will see us advocating this year for Congress to think about the voucher program in comparison to the LIHTC expansion that took place recently. LIHTC historically reaches the lowest income households when vouchers are layered into it. We've expanded LIHTC. Let's expand vouchers to match so that LIHTC continues to serve those folks at the same rate. And Ben, I see you're still on. Please give my gratitude to the senator for her leadership on this question. And my organization, my agency stands in strong support of her efforts to ensure accountability and an end to the violence and the undermining of civil rights in our communities. As I was saying to the group before, we can stomach a bit of a short down along the way if it's what it takes to do what needs to be done.
Well, thank you so much, David. Thank you so much to Commissioner Ho and kind of all of the staff from Minnesota Housing who are also on this call. Thank you to Senator Smith's staff who also joined us. And again, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for being in community together. Support to all my fellow Minnesotans. Be safe this weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.